because, as we just discussed a few minutes ago, a small traumatized group of victims or their supporters choosing how things are going to go based upon a shit end of the stick philosophy is something that humans will not follow, generally speaking, and society will not follow it. And you're seeing it in the world. You're seeing it in the culture. You're seeing it in elections.
They will eat their own. It won't be but a minute until they turn on their own. And that is, to me, part of the affirmation that it's wrong, is that it will in an instant be turned on those who support it.
Yeah. And it is already turned. That's the whole point. It's like we're too late for that. And I think today Hillel and I are acting as the harbingers or the people who are warning, again, a great litmus test or a great place to measure this. What is going on with men and masculinity? We're not saying that you shouldn't be sensitive. Of course you should be sensitive. You should be broad with your sensitivity. Any vector that's trying to treat maleness and masculinity as the enemy is a vector that's going to fucking lose.
For everyone.
Yes. And I think that's exactly the point of all of this. What is going on, everyone? Tis Miyanovich, and I welcome you to the main dojo, the place where we process the raw struggles of men in an unprecedented paradigm. There is something inside of you that wants you to be more than what you are. But there also may be something inside of you that wants you to go down. And for some of us, that means going down for good. So, remove your ego, drop your bullshit, become vulnerable, and step into the dojo, mate. A lot of this stuff comes from the people who are on the shit end of the stick, or those who fight for those that are on the shit end of the stick. And it's understandable. So
what do you mean?
Let's talk about the attractive thing. A lot of the people that have a problem with the men liking body parts or boobs are people who really aren't gifted in the looks category, or who have had bad experiences with shitty, ungentlemanly men.
Right. Or I will say maybe people who are gifted in that way, because that is also can be a real
because
burden.
That's all they ever hear from the world.
Right.
But a lot of these absolutist positions, for a lot of these concepts, the people that want to, on the socio-political left, that want to do a lot of the policing. So one of the reasons why this dojo and this podcast exists is to create a haven to just completely shut that shit out for good. And for us to be able to have these discussions without it, reasonable discussions. But a lot of that policing and a lot of that angst and absolutism and gatekeeping and purity tests and a lot of that stuff is coming from traumatized people or people who are getting the shit end of the stick. And okay, if people who get the shit end of the stick want to have philosophies and bases of logic and things like that, that's great. But the issue I find is that it's another one of these things where it more so develops into conspiracy, pernicious irrationality than it does something that's helpful ultimately, because it oftentimes just skews the facts, right? It skews the facts. So there's a connection between perhaps traumatized people or people who get the shit end of the stick and conspiracies, with selected facts, I should say. This is one of the things that I have such an issue with, is there's no talking to people who are in this position. When you're trauma reinforced or your whole life you've been eating the shit end of the stick, which is terrible. I'm not saying it's not terrible. There seems to be much more of a glue towards mentalities and political pursuits that are hardening themselves against counterbalancing facts. Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, when you talk about the struggles of boys and men, often the very first response is, well, what about girls? Girls have a lot of problems. And that is true. But they're not necessarily the same problems, and I'm not battling. This is not me or you. Are we talking about girls, or are we talking about
Right.
boys? Like, or are we talking about children in general? Because that is also, something that's deserving of. There are things that apply universally that can be considered. But and I'm sure this exists on the male side when talking about women and girls issues also, that we're very quick, everybody is very quick to say, yeah, but what
Right.
about the other? Because they also get the shit end of the stick. So, there's enough shitty stick ends
Yeah.
to go around, it
Yeah.
turns out. And, but it stops any progress and any real honest deliberation and any understanding of people who might be different than you, to immediately shut it down and turn the attention to something else. Yeah, but what about unequal pay? Well, that sucks. Unequal pay is immoral, it's unethical, it's illegal, it's all of those things. But if that's the response to saying boys and men are alienated from understanding who they are, and your response is to say something about how women get the short end of the stick, we are going to fail to understand each other and fail to create healthier, better, stronger, more compassionate men, which the world needs men.
Yes. Uh, Here, I'll ask you for just the quick response. Is masculinity going to go away? Well, first and foremost, is masculinity a thing?
Well, I think masculinity is more of a cultural thing. Again, it's a set of parentheses around a set of qualities that, depending on who you are and where you live and when you live there, those may or may change. Like, in my own community, in the Jewish community, for centuries, Jewish masculinity was intellectual. Hard work, yes. Work hard to provide for your family. It was, but a man was measured by his intellect. And when that's all you have, that's what you develop. When there isn't avenues for your physical liberation from, the realities of history, well, you develop the inner life. How, what's that man's prayer life like? A real man prays. A real man studies Torah. And that was, for centuries, defined the essence of Jewish manhood. How do we celebrate becoming a bar mitzvah? You read. Oh my God. I mean, like, how geeky can you get? And that's a survival mechanism, right? That's a development of what you have when what you have is limited. But for me, like, when I started studying martial arts, I was like, oh my God, even though I was a roughhouse kid with two older brothers, and I probably really, had shitty attitude towards girls when I was a kid and all that stuff, like, I've been living my whole life from the neck up. Like, I had never developed my body, my strength, my ability to withstand physical pain and discomfort. So, like, I can do that now. I live in a time and a place where culturally that's acceptable. And maybe you have to unlearn some of the softness of previous generations who that was the only power they had, was soft power. And nothing wrong with soft power, but when you don't have to only have that, maybe you want more of the other kind also, or maybe both are acceptable. So masculinity is harder to define because, and here I think there's I'm only really, I don't really even understand this social phenomenon, but I'm going to try to describe it as the magnetic poles. When the magnetic poles switch, like, this is apparently a thing in the history of the earth, that north hasn't always been north and south, but occasionally those magnetic poles actually migrate all the way around and switch. So I think that has happened with notions of masculine and feminine. And the expectation is that men will be more feminine and women will be more masculine. And that the things which we maybe traditionally associated with masculinity are now considered really great qualities for women, but they're toxic when the men. Like every woman who is praised by other women she's a strong and independent woman. She's a badass, right? Those are all, yeah, don't you want your daughters to grow up to be strong, independent badasses? I want my sons to grow up to be strong and independent badasses. Oh, that's terrible. You want your sons to grow up to be kind and gentle and sugar and spice. And you want your girls to be puppy dog tails and that's odd. I don't know what to make of that. Like, because I taught both of my children, who are different one from another, to study taekwondo and to learn how to not take anybody's shit. And if somebody, hits you, to hit them back. And I taught them both to cry and share their emotions and be vulnerable and willing to help and to forego your own needs for others. So I don't know. Are they, I wouldn't dream of saying, well, they're masculine or feminine, my kid. Like there is such a thing, but I guess the shifting there, I think, is more real. But what bothers me is the exclusivity that, like, suddenly the things which used to be positives for men can only be positives when applied to women. And the things which used to be considered positives for women can, you don't want your girls to be that. Only your sons should be that. I don't know. I think that's not good. I don't quite know.
Have you observed what I've observed? And I've observed it in myself. So let's talk about the dynamic of what's happened with me in life. I can say I was born and am more than sensitive. I'd say I'm more sensitive than most people, most males. I'm a little more sensitive than they are. And my experiences with masculinity were almost entirely of dysfunctional males. So there was a hardness there or coldness there. And what I allowed to happen was either to deal with it or to mimic it or whatever. I didn't know what I was doing when I was a kid. And I didn't have really good role models. Yeah. So I probably on the outside became too harsh. And on the inside was a puddle of tears waiting to happen, right? So I held that too harsh thing for a while. And by, somewhere around my early 20s, I could see that it wasn't helping me or other people. And so I let go of it and was like, I want, that's bullshit. That like hard male thing is bullshit. I want to get into my heart and my sensitivity and my sensibility. And I want to treat people from a deep and caring heart. So I went from too harsh and then I went to too soft, right? And then I would say somewhere right around the time where I met my wife and we started a family, I was transitioning back to try to find a good place to be that balanced out perhaps the harder aspects of being a male and the softer aspects of being a male or just being a human. So I basically went from being an asshole to being a pussy to
being a sensitive asshole.
Right. To whatever it is we want to call it. But it went too far. And it was too far in the beginning with the hard. And there definitely is a too far with soft. Yeah. So what I'm seeing now, in my experience, it is okay to feel and to tell another man, you need to work on how hard you're being. Okay. So you're working on this. You're too harsh, man. It's just not helpful. It's kind of dysfunctional. And it's also okay to say to another man, dude, this is one of those places where you're definitely being a pussy. Like you are
man up, as it were.
Grow a set, stop being a pussy and fucking get on it. Like it is okay to talk to men and to talk to one another about adjusting from both of those poles. But in the world that you and I are in the socio-political, philosophical realm of the left in America, if there is such a thing, it's like you're not allowed to say, holy shit, like culturally, we have swung too far into pussy land. Like we are snowflakes in the good sense that we are all individuals and have our own individual fingerprint and we have our own individual ways about us. And that's beautiful. That's beautiful. But then there's the aspect of being a snowflake where you're in pussy land. And
Well, yeah.
so do you see that as well? And is that where you think we are?
So part of why I think that's so difficult in this moment is because on the other side of the cultural political spectrum are some really horrible people, and who say stuff like "Don't be such a pussy," and so that is the association. And, and I'm not saying that's unreal. It's very real. And like you can't. I can't pretend like, well, everybody should just judge me for me and not with any other cultural data relevant. I'm like, that would be nice, but it's never going to happen. And the truth is, just like in the gun owning thing, if you tell somebody you own guns, they assume you're, from my cold dead hands. And then it takes a little time for them to realize, oh, I'm making some assumptions, and that's not really true. And he's not actually one of those, idiots. So, okay. So I think that is part of why it is hard, why it's judged harshly when people like you and me say that stuff, is because the other people who are saying it and saying it more loudly than we are and more often and with very negative effects are the loudest voice around. And we're coming with a measure of nuance, which the other guys are not. There's no nuance over there. And so nuance it usually loses to non-nuance in the cultural level discourse. So I do see that, and I've seen it a lot in both personal and professional settings where the cultural expectations of you are extraordinarily limited, and there's a right one and a wrong one, and the wrong one is it is subject to all kinds of bad mouthing, which nobody wants. Like, you don't, who wants to be that guy? Right. But I'm not being that guy. And, but yes, there are people who say you're that guy.
Yeah, it does. Yeah. Yeah. So what I've noticed is when a right wing Punisher truck sticker wielding typical guy in that sense, right? Is like, you guys are being a bunch of liberals or a bunch of pussies, or you guys are being a bunch of pussies. What I've noticed is they're both wrong and right. They're not just wrong. And that's where the nuance comes in, because number one, here's where they're wrong. They define masculinity and maleness and strength from a very narrow set of values. And so if you fall outside of that, you're a pussy. And so what that enables them to do, and then they also stereotype the entirety of liberalism as outside of those parameters. So there's their mythology, their false mythology right off the bat. Every liberal is a pussy, and every male liberal is not masculine. So they're wrong from that perspective, right? Number one, they're wrong from how they define masculinity or what's male power. They're wrong about that. The set of values is too narrow. It needs to be more broad. So they're often wrong from that standpoint. They're often wrong from the standpoint of all liberals are not strong men or not masculine. They're also wrong there. So they usually start off by being wrong. But here is the problem. While that's going on, they can also observe that men on the left, many people who are on the left, who are attracted to the left for certain reasons, are living like, thinking like, and acting like hypersensitive pussies. They can observe that that's happening, and they are correct about a certain percentage of the population being too sensitive, being such pussies. But they also are wrong about what they consider the parameters for being a pussy. They're saying all of it's you're all being a bunch of pussies.
Well, it's one thing to be easily offended, right? Like, that's part of the problem of the left, is how easily offended we are. But that guy you're describing is trying to offend you. That's what he's trying to do. It's not like he was talking about something and he happened to offend you, and maybe, but whatever happened to sticks and stones may break my bones, but words will never hurt me. Like, this whole words are violence is so unhelpful. All of that, like, just, it's not man up, it's toughen up a little bit. God, like, what is wrong with you that you can't, tolerate a little bit of off color or whatever? That's violence. No, it's not. It is not. You want to know violence is like, everyone's got a plan until they get punched in the face, right?
There's a lot of that. Like, if a construction worker whistles at the big boobs across the street, that's rape culture. Right.
But now here's, the poles switching.
Right.
But if a woman says, "Ooh, Idris Elba, rub yourself all over me."
Right.
That's good. She's just being positive about her sexuality.
Right. Right.
Sorry, Idris.
I'm sure he's probably not listening.
I'm sure he's gets it all the time.
But so the point that I was bringing up is that sort of the essence of the podcast is like, it's okay, and I'm glad that men are trying to get in touch with themselves in terms of emotions and being true to their emotions and their sensitivity and sensibility. But I do think, generally speaking, we've swung too fucking far. Generally, at least a portion of the culture has swung too far, and it's gone into pussydom, and people need to just fucking, just temper that out. Just like come back a little bit. And maybe part of the issue is these gentlemen never had any kind of good modeling, or the only modeling they see are the types of males who are on the right.
Right.
Right. Maybe they don't know that exists. This kind of nuance exists around maleness and masculinity, because, as you say, the main message right now that I see being pumped out over the dysfunctional airwaves of the internet leans more towards, if you're a man, shut the fuck up. You don't have any business complaining, talking about your problems.
Right.
You don't have any business talking about masculinity. Oh, poor you. Like,
right. You're just part of the patriarchy,
or whatever the bullshit mythology is. And as we started the podcast off, and we were talking about shit end of the stick. Well, from my viewpoint, middle-aged men are really getting a good old fashioned shit end of the stick. So there's like a battle between traumatized people. Like, I'm supposed to feel bad because I'm a tall white male who has had a lot of privilege and can walk through the world in a way that most people maybe don't ever get a chance to walk through. And maybe my trauma level or my shit end of the stick level is a 6 or 7 out of 10, which still isn't that great. It's still
no,
but
and if the response to that, I'm hurting, is, oh, poor middle-aged white man. If that's the cultural response, that makes it worse. That just rubs salt in the wound. That just forces you to go deeper in and further away from other people and from being honest about what's going on with you with people who might be able to help you. It's the most callous thing that is just somehow accepted. It's callous because, and it's justified because you belong to this, identity group. We're going to find that this kind of identity division is not beneficial to anybody.
Yeah. Because the disabled black transgender dwarf is a 9.5 out of 10, and I'm a 6.8 out of 10. Fuck me. Right. Now, and I'm just using myself as an example in this instance. There are men in our community that are at a 9 out of 10. They were at a almost 10 out of 10 within the last year, and they were going to end their life because of it. And they're full on white and tall and good looking and all of that shit. Right.
That shit does not protect you from this stuff.
No. Or somehow because the British were fucking slave owners, somehow I'm going to ignore my 10 out of 10 because white people, I'm supposed to feel so bad. I'm not going to seek help or say anything because white people brought slaves to America. Like, just the craziest. I mean, everything is, I don't want the podcast to be about pointing out, the aspects of the toxic left bullshit.
No.
But the issue is that we are dealing with and talking about masculinity here. And yes, we know from years of experience that people on the right wing have a very limited way that they deal with it. And we almost don't talk about it because it's so stupid and we've been talking about it for fucking years and I'm tired of talking about it. But we talk more about the shit that goes down on the left because that's what we're in right now. And there are definitely men. I mean, our first guest on this podcast, he has an anonymous name and I'm bringing him into this podcast to talk about it because of the repercussions that might actually come from him actually mentioning maleness and masculinity in the reality that he's in.
Right. Well, look, I feel this is important to say that part of what's wrong about the right-wing narrow definition of masculinity is that it's entirely heterosexual. Like, you cannot be gay and a man. And like, I reject that out of hand. First of all, it's stupid. But not only that, but it also goes against my lived experiences, which are, I know homosexuals who are pretty tough. Like this is just not real. So it shows the stupidity of the right-wing definition is that it's all heterosexual and there's no room within it for the obvious minority but non-pathological minority expression of human sexuality. But that's one thing. But on the left, heterosexual is a slur. Oh, you're cis het. That's not so that we can know you better. That's not what the cis het community chose as the way to talk about them. That's how someone who isn't that says about you so as to other you. And God forbid you should be het, as again, compelling majority of the aggregate of humanity is. But you have to say, well, yeah, but that you have to somehow diminish that in order to fit into this model where, so either I have to exaggerate heterosexuality and say it's the only way to be a real man, which is, I don't even like joking about it in that way because it sounds so dumb. But or you have to say, yeah, well, those lousy heterosexuals, they just screw it up for everybody. I mean, come on, what kind of choices is that? Like, this is our problem, is that, like, these are our choices.
And the thing is, it's being rejected and more. And one of the reasons why more people who are center to left aren't rejecting it out of hand or saying anything. Well, the number one reason is probably they're afraid to rub the rhubarb wrong. Look, there's traumatized people and marginalized people get to use their marginalized status as a shield for a lot of shit that the rest of us would never get away with. And they do it often. So you can't criticize. You can't, what I find interesting is in many ways, traumatized people are carrying forward the MO of their abusers and how they themselves are acting. They're doing the exact same pattern.
Yeah, it's an inversion.
And not only that, they're not really delivering that kind of paper cutting, mosquito biting abuse. They're not carrying it to their abusers. They're carrying it to the people that are most proximate to them, the people that are on their own side who are trying to figure out a way to fight on the same side. And so the people that are center to left they're not nuanced enough to kind of pick up on all of this, or they don't want to rub the rhubarb wrong because it's just constant fucking problems from traumatized people. When you point things out, you're just going to get more of the same shit from them, or they legitimately just see that aspect of the left as a bunch of retards. That's becoming more and more of what the conclusions are, is this isn't even tenable to even deal with people who are doing this, saying things like this, or with white male patriarchy, or whatever it is that they're using, their mythology, that all men are shit, all toxicity, or all masculinity is toxic. Whatever is in that area, people are just looking at it and going, this is just retardation. This is fucking retarded. I'm not even going to deal with those people.
It's just the reverse ideologue, like, absolutism, where there's no room. It's pure fundamental outrage.
Yeah,
and I try to avoid that because that is where no progress is made. That is where no communication and understanding happens. And I am not interested in being somebody else's, punching bag.
Yeah. Yeah. I think part of the issue is that it for me is that why I'm piping up now, finally, after decades of watching this development, is it is hindering men from getting help or from talking about their issues, because they are issues relative to being a man, not just a human, but being a man. And so people don't have a basis for it, a language for it. They don't have a culture for it, because we believe in things that are on the left. We're sensitive. We care about the environment. We care about society. We care about the have-nots.
Right.
But within that culture, the dominant force is becoming this toxicity that we're talking about. And so these men can't say, I have issues relative to being a man. Can somebody help me? Because they'll get laughed at. Right. That's why our first guest here on this podcast is that person, because that's exactly what he's going through. So number one, this kind of toxicity on the left is growing so much that men who need help and are in crisis are afraid to ask for it. And then the second part is, I think that we just lost an election over it, likely, or that was a contributing factor to it.
At least a contributing factor, for sure.
So once we get to this point where we're losing elections and strong, good men who we need to help the world to progress are being harmed by it, then that's when I fucking say something. That's when I have a podcast. That's when I call Hillel and say, get on the podcast. Like, it's time to stop just ignoring it and not calling it out, because it can get worse than Donald Trump for those of us that are on the left. And if you're on the right, I don't know how you think that Donald Trump is a legitimate whatever.
Yeah. How it's not going to be worse for you too. Yeah, right, it's going to be worse for you too.
I don't know how that's possible, but you might, and that's fine. I just know that on the left, we have a situation with maleness and masculinity. And we need to be able to talk like this without judgment. Because it's time there's an immense power inside of men that can shift a paradigm, and that's needed on the left. So
yes, I'll say it again. The world needs men, and full stop. I don't have to say, and also something else is true. Some other time I'll say that, but not now, because this is the topic. And the people on the left, the philosophical, thought leaders of the left who you're describing here, are not open to this discussion that we are having. Now, maybe they can be open to it. I hope they can be open to it. But right now, I don't think they are. And I'm not interested in talking to the brick wall. I'm interested in talking to people who are open about it and who aren't going to be offended. Like, nobody is here to say one is better than the other, or somebody isn't in the spectrum of deserving humanity. That's the ground rules. Now, no snowflakes allowed. There has to be a deeper level of honesty. And if you can't have the strength of your convictions and hear people who don't think like you do, and maybe even think differently and opposite of you, and try to work out some truth between you, well, I'm not interested in further battling the sexes, or in further isolating ourselves one from another, or in maintaining these cultural tropes of us against them. I'm not holding myself up as perfect in any way, but my spouse and I have a long-standing commitment to never buy into the typical husband-wife portrayals, like the old ball and chain, or that kind of thing, right? Like, never. And she's like, I talk with women, and these women, we're talking in our little circle after synagogue, and they're bad-mouthing their husband. My husband doesn't do this, and my husband doesn't do that. She's like, what is wrong with you? Why are you not lifting him up? Why are you not saying, my husband's awesome, and I back him up. He needs something, he gets it if it doesn't, if it's not unavailable. And vice versa. Like, I would never say, the old ball and chain won't let me come out tonight. First of all, it's not true. And secondly, like, what are you talking about? Like, why would you ever say that about the other?
Yeah.
If we will never get to that, if you're so afraid of stepping on the other person's toes that you can't be honest.
I just know that humans are gonna, as bad as it seems, right now. Like, humans are going to figure out a way to succeed. And the definition of success is going to be different for everybody, but humans are going to figure out a way to go to the next thing. And we've proven so far that we're unstoppable, and we're usually we're probably the only force that can stop ourselves, unless it's nature. Of course, nature could rise up and swallow us, or the great powers of the heavens could fucking,
who knows,
the aliens could drop one on us. But generally speaking, when you look at a species that started off the way that we did, and then you observe from about 1880 to 1968 what happened in 88 years,
right,
and what we did, it's fucking unbelievable, and we're fucking unbelievable. So we're not going anywhere.
Well, it's unbelievable, and it's thrilling, and it's also really freaking scary. I'm not the first to point this out, but it took 5 to 10,000 years to go from canoes to ocean liners, but then it took 100 years to go from Wright brothers to Skylab, right? Like, holy shit! Like the speed at which we are moving. I sometimes think it's approaching warp speed, and I sometimes think we are speeding up as the wall is coming towards us.
I agree. And I'm bringing it up because there will never be in leading humans a shit end of the stick philosophy. One of these shit end of the stick philosophies. Okay. And so what am I saying there? No one really wakes up every day and with the vast majority of their energy invests in those that are less fortunate. We invest in those that are less fortunate with the energy that we have left over after we do all of our other stuff. That's the vast majority of humans. And that's a fact. You can't shift it. Some people are the exception. They do wake up every day and they're like, there are beings that are less fortunate. All of my energy is going to go into them. That happens, but it's super rare, right? In terms of the statistics of human behavior,
and arguably unsustainable.
Right. So
you have to put on your own mask first.
The shit end of the stick philosophy is oftentimes a guilt and shame regime against what we just said, that humans are somehow supposed to switch the poles of how we operate in society so much that those who got the shit end of the stick are brought up completely, or everything is made up for them, or the shit end of the stick is going to go away. That is not how humans do things.
Well, I'm likely to get into a lot of trouble for what I'm about to say, as someone who grew up with just about every advantage I can think of. But there is no equity in the universe. It simply does not exist. Now, we can do our best to make sure that everyone has and that no one is left behind. And I consider that a noble life to live.
Yeah.
But the pursuit of total equality is a fool's errand. And it can lead to, the Harrison Bergeron ridiculousness of, well, now people who are taller have to wear weights around their neck so that they're shorter, so that everybody is exactly the same size. Right? That's the logical conclusion, and it's, of course, absurd. So, yes, there needs to be an uplifting of those who got the shit end of the stick, for sure. And especially people like me who have every advantage and can. If you have more, you have to do more and give more. Yes, that's a driving philosophy for me. But it does not mean that what it doesn't mean is that victims become leaders. They don't. If all you do is care for the victims, you never produce the leaders and the victors. There needs to be someone who has more, who does more, even if they started with less. They have to not settle for less. They have to have a drive. They have to be aggressive and assertive and go out and build and tear down and create and make families. Like, you have to have that. And that person is, you can't have everybody be the same and have that person.
The reason I bring that up is there's just an aspect of this that's unstoppable. And what I see, and you talk about like the wall, you see us progressing so fast and we may be progressing into the wall. I see the same thing happening for the far aspect of the left, is that they're accelerating themselves. I call it the ditch, and that might not be the best analogy because of how marginalized people have been killed historically, but they're accelerating into a ditch, and because you simply cannot have the philosophy of the progressive aspect of society being the philosophy of shit end of the stick. And this is the perfect example of, and this is why I'll ask you this question, because you said this the last time that we talked. This is the perfect example of why you can't have a negative shit end of the stick philosophy leading progress. Look at what is happening, because it's not nuanced enough and objective enough to work well with the people that are all together on one side. It starts to eat away at the people on your own side, right? It is eating away its own family and eating away its own potential for strength. And we have a consistent stream of rejection of it now coming from our side. And where I see that the most and the strongest is with males. Every week, somebody else is commenting or emailing to me like, I'm done with this. Like, maybe they associate what we're talking with. They call it liberalism, but it isn't. They think that this pernicious thing is liberalism. So they're walking away from it in one way or another. But the giant of maleness is acting as a litmus test here, like the canary in a coal mine, and it's rising up and moving away from what we're talking about. This thing is not headed, it is headed nowhere, because its presuppositions that are included are things like we've talked about. All maleness is bullshit. There's no such thing as maleness. Everyone is the same.
That's like saying, I'm colorblind. I don't see race and color. To say like there is no maleness, all male, like all is the same, it's to deny reality. You don't get to say what I am. You don't get to say what men are. Just like I don't get to say, well, I don't see race. Oh, well, that's nice that you don't see race, but bullshit, you don't see race. Like, come on, give me a break. What are you, blind? Like, maybe if you're blind, right, then, but other than that, no. And it's, if all these men are saying this is not what men means, then people who aren't men have to listen to them. And it doesn't mean we're right all the time. That's not what it means. It means that we know what we know our own reality and our own experience. And that idea, like, well, I don't see gender. I do. I do. Like, I don't know, like, and none of that is to deny anything or anybody.
The last thing I want to bring up here, we're coming up on 2 hours, is the last time we talked, we were talking about language policing in purity tests.
Yeah.
You said we knew this was going to happen. We were warned. And you were saying we were warned of the negative effects of such things. So let's talk about that in terms of policing and maleness and masculinity. What do you see with what's happening on the left side of the culture, the one that we're involved in, and all of the things that we talked about? We were warned what was going to happen and what's happening and where's it going to go?
I think the purity tests can only go one place, and that is to a smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller amount of things that are considered pure. So if that's what you want, you're going to end up with, a meaningless set of realities that are pure enough in your mind to be unimpeachable. And even then, someone will find something to, impeach. It's a dead end street. that kind of purity test. It and it denies to other people the very thing which you insist on having yourself, which is I get to speak my truth. And I don't even wish that I want to say I'm sorry, but I'm not even sorry. Like, the richness of life is in the diversity of voices, and purity again is not found in nature. Things aren't pure; they're mixes, and so the policing of speech is just, it's exactly what we don't like about the other guys, is the policing of speech. And yet then we do it. And boy, like, we're like really good at it, right? We put them to shame because they can say stuff, and whatever, like, okay, it's not good, but then they forgive you, but not us. Like, never, we'll never forget it. You said it once, that's it. It's not good. And what makes it even worse is that it is selectively applied, and only this group of people gets to decide how it's selectively applied. And the hypocrisy behind that is just so self-evident. And I think you're right. Like, the shift represented by the last election, the cultural pushback is in part because of that, because it's the smaller and smaller amount of things you can say that are pure, and it is the selective application of language policing, and it's and only a small group of victims gets to decide what is and isn't okay to say. That's a recipe for disaster. And yeah, I think, again, the problem with seeing it coming and calling it out is the other side is calling it out, and those guys are assholes, and they're interested in taking away your rights. So, you must be one of those. You're a right winger. No, like, just because someone else who's, outside of what I am also says this does not mean that we're the same thing. And I guess I would rather, like, I don't think we have to choose between not censoring and policing our speech and just tolerating and allowing horrible speech. We don't have to choose one or the other. We can say everybody needs to understand that words have power, and you should be careful with how you wield your power. Wield it well and wisely. And at the same time, everyone should say, lighten up, Francis. Give me a break. So I don't want to choose those. I think we can have both of that. But if I had to choose, I'd choose lighten up, Francis. I would choose more horrible speech than a small select group gets to decide what is and isn't.
Because, as we just discussed a few minutes ago, a small traumatized group of victims or their supporters choosing how things are going to go based upon a shit end of the stick philosophy is something that humans will not follow, generally speaking, and society will not follow it. And you're seeing it in the world. You're seeing it in the culture. You're seeing it in elections.
They will eat their own. It won't be but a minute until they turn on their own. And that is, to me, part of the affirmation that it's wrong, is that it will in an instant be turned on those who support it.
Yeah. And it is already turned. That's the whole point. It's like we're too late for that. And I think today Hillel and I are acting as the harbingers, or the people who are warning, again, a great litmus test or a great place to measure this. What is going on with men and masculinity? We're not saying that you shouldn't be sensitive. Of course you should be sensitive. You should be broad with your sensitivity. Any vector that's trying to treat maleness and masculinity as the enemy is a vector that's going to fucking lose.
For everyone.
Yes. And I think that's exactly the point of all of this. Do you have anything else, Hillel, that you want to bring up today?
No, man, I love you. You're awesome.
I love you too. This is amazing. Give me some time to chop it up. I've got a couple people I need to get. I've got their stuff in the can. I got to get them up first. But it'll probably be within the next couple of weeks. But I honestly think, man, I'm trying to channel the hammer of the gods here with this podcast, and it's already starting. So you're probably one of the most profound voices that I know. And I it's probably going to create more good and more bad, more good and more challenge, because that's what's going to happen. Right. So just be ready for it.